At 0900 hours off the coast of Somalia, a small skiff cut across the water at 45 knots. The engines roared, the crew waved their arms and shouted in broken English, claiming they were carrying humanitarian food for people in need. From a distance, it looked like a relief mission. But high above the waves, Navy surveillance was already tracking the truth. The heat signatures were wrong. The engines were running too hard, too fast, and too heavy for any ordinary aid delivery. The USS Bainbridge already had the answer. Intelligence reports confirmed this was not a mercy run. It was a smuggling route disguised as compassion. 11 times before, the same trick had worked. Not today. Not with special operators standing by. Not with a Seahawk circling overhead. Not with every sensor on that skiff locked in from above. So ask yourself this. If you were the pilot looking down at that boat, watching the flag snap in the wind, would you hesitate? Or would you make the call, knowing what was really hidden beneath those tarps? That skiff was not random. It was the 12th run in a pipeline the network believed was untouchable. 11 times before, the disguise had fooled the world. A mercy flag, a deck covered in sacks marked as food aid, crews trained to say the right words in English and Somali. Aid workers, not criminals. Relief, not contraband. And every time, hesitation bought them another chance. But this time, hesitation could have changed everything. Under the tarps were 280 kilos of high-value illegal cargo, packed into clean white bricks the size of textbooks. On the global black market, that shipment was worth around $36 million. Split 7 ways, each man on board imagined walking away with nearly $1.5 million. Enough to disappear in Mombasa, enough to buy a new identity in Djibouti, enough to pay their way into Europe and never look back. For men raised on a coastline shaped by poverty, conflict, and ruthless local power. That money was more than profit. It was a way out. For the network behind them, it was something else entirely. It was strategy. The money moved through shadow routes, turning into equipment, satellite phones, payments, and quiet favors that kept officials looking the other way. Some of that cash would eventually reach extremist channels, helping fund operations that brought chaos to crowded streets and pressure to peacekeeping forces. This skiff was not just a delivery boat. It was part of a system, a hidden current moving damage across borders, across oceans, and into cities that would never see it coming. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Bainbridge, the picture was clear. Screens glowed with streams of data. Heat signatures pulsed red. Course changes triggered warning after warning. Propulsion readings told a story no painted slogan could hide. Engines running that hot did not carry grain. Relief boats did not zigzag 45 miles offshore. This was a known pattern, dressed up as a rescue mission. Then the captain's voice cut through the room. If we blink, we teach them how to win. If we act, we end the performance. Nobody spoke for a moment. Everyone understood what was at stake. Because if this run made it through, every smuggling crew from the Gulf of Aden to the Caribbean would learn the same lesson. Paint the right words on the hull, raise the right flag, shout humanitarian when challenged, and wait for the world to hesitate. For the operators below deck, the stakes were not measured in money, headlines, or politics. They were measured in what would happen next if this boat disappeared over the horizon. For them, it was personal. Every kilo on that boat meant more young lives collapsing in European cities, more families breaking apart in quiet American neighborhoods, more money flowing into violent networks overseas, the same networks that had already taken people they once stood beside. To the operators, those sacks were not cargo. They were futures being stolen before they even had a chance to begin. That is why, when the Seahawk rose into the Somali sky, its rotors pounding the air, the crew was not thinking about politics. They were thinking about truth hidden beneath a disguise. The smugglers had played the same card 11 times before. On the 12th run, the Navy was ready to tear up the script. The crew on the skiff had done this before, and they knew exactly how the performance was supposed to go. When the gray silhouette of the Bainbridge appeared on the horizon, they did not panic. They pushed harder. The helmsman slammed the throttles forward. 4 outboard engines roared at full power, throwing the skiff across the surface as white spray exploded behind it like chalk lines across blue glass. At 45 knots, the zigzag began, hard left, sharp right. Every few minutes, the same pattern repeated. It was practiced, deliberate, designed to make pursuit boats waste fuel, miss angles, and hesitate just long enough for the skiff to survive. Against local patrols, it had worked before. Against regional forces, delay had bought them hours. And in their world, hours meant escape. At the bow, one man lifted the humanitarian flag higher, almost daring the Americans to make the wrong move. Another shouted into the wind in broken English, "Food for people!" It was theater, calculated, rehearsed, built for cameras. Because one image taken at the wrong second could twist the entire story. A photo of American sailors confronting men under an aid banner could travel around the world before anyone understood what was really under the tarps. But appearances could not hide physics. At full speed, the skiff was burning through fuel fast. 200 gallons were already gone. Maybe 2 hours remained in the tanks. Their course pointed north toward a shallow inlet rumored to be under the control of the network behind them. But the numbers did not care about rumors. They would run dry long before they reached safety. Still, they trusted the illusion. Speed had saved them before. The flag had saved them before. The words humanitarian aid had saved them before. Why would the 12th time be any different? Inside the Combat Information Center of the Bainbridge, the room stayed cold and quiet. Screens glowed with data, heat signatures, fuel estimates, route projections. Every turn, every surge of speed, every course change told the same story. This was not confusion. This was defiance. A dangerous run hidden behind a mask. The captain did not need another warning. "Classify them as a threat," he said. "This is not aid. This is a performance." Above the water, the Seahawk followed the chase with steady precision, its shadow sliding over the waves. The co-pilot leaned into the comms and broadcast through the long-range acoustic device. "Stop your vessel. This is the United States Navy." The command rolled across the water with crushing force, louder than anything the men on that skiff had expected. Spray whipped around them. The engines kept screaming. The flag rose even higher. And this is where I want you to put yourself inside that cockpit. You are looking down at a boat dressed as mercy. Men are waving a humanitarian banner. They are shouting that they carry aid. But every sensor, every report, every movement tells you the same thing. The story on the surface is not the truth beneath it. Do you believe the performance in front of you, or do you trust the data glowing red on your screen? That was the razor's edge the Navy walked every second. One moment of hesitation and a shipment worth $36 million could vanish into the horizon. The smugglers had made their choice. Defiance, deception, speed. Now the next move belonged to the Navy. The warnings had already gone out. For 15 minutes, sirens, loudspeakers, and the thunder of rotor wash tore across the sea, but the skiff never slowed. The men on board clung to their disguise, waving the humanitarian flag as if it could protect them from the truth closing in from above. On the Bainbridge, the captain had seen enough. "They remain non-compliant," he said. "Escalate." From the Seahawk overhead, the change was instant. A controlled warning burst cut into the water ahead of the skiff's bow. The ocean jumped in sharp white columns, the sound rolling across the waves like a final line being drawn. This was not meant to destroy. It was meant to stop. A last warning written in salt spray. Most crews would have backed down right there. Not this one. Maybe it was loyalty to the people who sent them. Maybe it was fear of what waited if they failed. Maybe it was desperation. Whatever the reason, they pushed harder. The throttles stayed forward. The engines screamed. The spray behind them stretched longer as the skiff tried to outrun the decision it had forced. But the operators already knew what came next. The warning phase was over. Precision came next. At the open door of the helicopter, the gunner settled into position. The skiff below twisted across the water, fighting the waves, changing angles, trying to make one clean shot impossible. But training exists for moments like this. The gunner exhaled. The first shot cracked across the sky. One engine blew apart in smoke and fragments. The skiff lurched. Speed began to bleed away. The men on board shouted to each other, and for the first time, panic slipped through the act. The Seahawk stayed steady. A second shot hit another engine. Oil sprayed across the stern. The zigzags widened. The sharp turns disappeared. A third shot brought the skiff down to a crawl, and then the fourth came like a final hammer strike. The last engine failed. The skiff stopped moving. Just like that, the chase was over. A few seconds earlier, it had been racing across the water under a mask of mercy. Now it drifted helplessly, exposed for what it really was. So ask yourself this. If you were in that gunner's seat, would your hands have stayed steady? 4 precise shots, 4 engines disabled, no one on board harmed. It sounds simple when you hear it after the fact. But now imagine doing it from a helicopter shaking in wind and sea spray while the target cuts side to side across open water. That is not luck. That is years of training, thousands of hours, thousands of rounds, and the kind of calm that only comes from experience. On the Bainbridge, a brief cheer broke through the silence. Then discipline snapped back into place. The job was not finished. Boarding teams had to launch. Evidence had to be secured. The people on board had to be taken into custody. The hidden cargo had to be documented piece by piece. The skiff had lost its speed, but the mission was not over until boots were on deck. For the smugglers, the illusion had collapsed. The flag, the shouting, the sudden turns, the performance. All of it ended in 4 moments of precision. The Navy had taken back control of the sea. Now the skiff drifted in silence, smoke curling from its shattered engines. Above the deck, the flag still moved in the wind, but it no longer looked like protection. It looked like surrender. The men on the skiff crouched low as the sound of approaching engines grew louder over the waves. 2 RHIBs launched from the Bainbridge and cut across the water fast, their wakes spreading behind them in sharp white lines. 12 operators moved in with quiet precision, covered in dark gear, focused on one thing only: control. The maneuver was textbook. One boat came in from starboard, the other swept around from port. Both closed the distance at high speed, boxing the skiff in before anyone on board could think of another escape route. Spray whipped across the smugglers' faces as the truth finally settled in. There was nowhere left to go. Above them, the Seahawk hovered in place, its presence alone enough to end any last idea of resistance. Then the command came across the water in English and Somali. "Hands up! Do not move!" One man made the mistake of shifting too quickly toward something on the deck. A targeting light appeared across his chest from above. He froze. In the next second, everything changed. The fight went out of them. Metal clattered onto the wooden deck. Hands rose into the air. The operators hooked their lines, crossed onto the skiff, and moved with the kind of speed that comes only from repetition and discipline. Within seconds, all 7 men were secured face down on the salt-stained boards. The performance was over. But the real moment came when the first burlap sack was cut open. No grain spilled out. No rice, no flour, no emergency supplies. Instead, the operators found tightly wrapped white bricks sealed in plastic and hidden beneath the aid markings. The message went back to the Bainbridge. Cargo confirmed. 280 kilos. $36 million. A fortune hidden inside sacks dressed up as compassion now sat exposed beneath the sun. For the men on the skiff, the illusion collapsed with the sound of restraints closing around their wrists. The money they had imagined was gone. The new lives they had pictured were gone. The escape routes they had trusted were gone. One man lowered his head and whispered a prayer into the deck. Another stared out at the burning edge of the horizon, knowing the people who sent him would not see failure as an excuse. The operators moved without celebration. Every package was photographed. Every detail was logged. Every marking, every sack, every hidden compartment was documented for the record. This was no longer a chase. It was evidence. Then came the final step. The skiff could not be left behind for someone else to recover, repaint, and send back into the same pipeline. So the team carried out the disposal protocol. Fuel was spread across the damaged hull, the broken engines, and the false aid markings that had fooled so many before. A flare dropped onto the deck. In seconds, the boat was swallowed by bright orange heat. Black smoke twisted into the sky, carrying the last trace of the lie with it. The words painted on the hull disappeared first. Food aid, mercy, relief, all of it burned away. By the time the smugglers were loaded onto the RHIBs, the skiff was nothing but smoke, heat, and collapsing wood. The orange glow reflected across the waves like a final warning. A disguise that had worked 11 times before had finally met its end. On the 12th run, there was no escape. No story left to sell, no mask left to hide behind. And as the flames consumed what remained of the skiff, the horizon returned to silence. Calm, deceptive, almost peaceful. But everyone on the Bainbridge knew the truth. Out here, peace was never just the absence of noise. Sometimes it was what came after the lie was finally exposed. To anyone sailing through those waters the next morning, it would have looked like nothing had ever happened. The sea was calm, the smoke was gone. The horizon had swallowed every trace of the chase. But for the criminal network, for the Navy, and for everyone who understood what had almost slipped through, that day left a mark. $36 million in illegal cargo had vanished into ash, salt water, and smoke. Somewhere far from the coast, accountants would be trying to explain the loss to men who did not forgive failure. Their so-called untouchable disguise had been exposed in full view of the world. For them, it was not only money gone. It was a strategy broken, a playbook destroyed, a mask burned away where everyone could see it. On the Bainbridge, the paperwork started immediately. Photos were filed. Evidence was recorded. Every package, every mark, every detail was logged and secured. But the fight was not only happening on the water anymore. It was moving into the information war. A photo of a burning boat marked as aid could travel faster than the truth behind it. Some people would understand what had really been uncovered. Others might only see a vessel with relief markings going up in flames. Would the world see a smuggling operation exposed? Or would it see the Navy destroying what looked like humanitarian supplies? That uncertainty hung in the air longer than the smoke. For the operators, there was no confusion. They had opened the sacks. They had seen what was inside. They had weighed it, photographed it, and held the deception in their own hands. No headline could rewrite that reality. 7 men were stopped. 280 kilos were taken out of circulation. Lives in cities far beyond that horizon may never know how close the danger came. But even in victory, there was no celebration that lasted, because everyone on that ship knew the same thing. Somewhere, another boat was already being prepared, another flag was being painted, another crew was being taught the right words to shout when challenged, another lie was being dressed up as mercy. And that is where the question turns to you. When criminals learn to paint compassion on the outside and hide destruction underneath, how do you respond? Do you hesitate because of how it might look? Or do you trust the evidence, the training, and the truth right in front of you? The Navy made its choice that day, but what would yours have been? The ocean went quiet again as the Bainbridge moved through the waves, the captured crew secured below deck. Quiet, but not safe. Because in waters like these, quiet never lasts. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another disguise was already taking shape. And the only certainty was this: men like those operators would be called again. Called to look past the mask. Called to separate truth from performance. Called to remind the world that hesitation always has a price.